For 100 years, 82% of all the meat American families ate passed through a single square kilometer of land. Think about that. 82%. The Union stockyards in Chicago were the densest concentration of death and money in human history. Here, in this labyrinth of pens, 18 million animals were slaughtered a year. It was an assembly line that never stopped. They called it the hog butcher for the world. Philip Armour and Gustavus Swift built an empire here that invented the modern food industry. Henry Ford admitted he got the idea for his automotive assembly line right here, watching carcasses move along chains. This was the Silicon Valley of the 19th century, only instead of chips, they produced bacon and soap. But today, all that remains of the eighth wonder of the world is a single stone gate leading nowhere. In 1971, the greatest market on the planet closed. Tens of thousands of jobs vanished, and the neighborhood plunged into depression. How did a monopoly that controlled every dinner table in America lose the war to simple trucks? This isn't just a story about business. This is a story about how politics, technology, and a simple asphalt road can kill the greatest industrial legend. Part 1. Origins, Swamp and Ice. The story of Chicago as the meat capital began with geography and physics. Before the Civil War, the concept of fresh meat on a national scale didn't exist in the U.S. You ate what your local butcher killed that morning. Transporting a steak from Texas to New York was impossible. It would rot on the way. So cowboys drove live herds halfway across the country to railroads. It was expensive, cruel, and inefficient. Animals lost weight, got sick, and died. In 1865, a consortium of railroad companies made a night's move. They bought a huge, rotting swamp south of Chicago, drained it, and built a unified hub, the Union Stockyards. The idea was brilliant in its simplicity. Create a place where the West, livestock, meets the East, money. But the real revolution was made by a man named Gustavus Swift. He was obsessed with efficiency. Swift realized that transporting live cows was economic madness. You pay to ship the whole animal, but 60% of its weight is inedible waste, bone, blood, water. You are paying to ship garbage. Swift decided, slaughter the cattle in Chicago and ship only the dressed carcasses to New York. To do this, he hired engineer Andrew Chase, and together they created the first reliable, refrigerated railcar. It was a thermos on wheels, cooled by ice from the Great Lakes. This invention turned the world upside down. Suddenly, Chicago meat in Boston cost less than meat from a local cow. The second titan, Philip Armour, went even further. He declared war on waste. His slogan became legend. We use everything but the squeal. Fat was turned into soap and margarine, bones into glue and buttons, hair into brushes, internal organs into medicine. Soon, byproducts began bringing Armour more profit than the meat itself. This allowed him to lower prices so much that no local butcher could compete with him. Monopoly was born out of efficiency. Part 2. The ascent, the jungle, and the conveyor. The heart of the slaughterhouses was the disassembly line. It was a mesmerizing and terrifying ballet of death. The animal was hoisted to the top floor, stunned, and hung on a chain. Then gravity took over. The carcass slid down, passing hundreds of workers. Each made only one cut. One slit, another skinned, a third chopped. The speed was frantic. In 1906, this world shuddered. Young socialist Upton Sinclair published the novel The Jungle. He wanted to tell about the slave labor of immigrants, but readers saw something else. They saw rats falling into meat grinders. They saw tubercular workers spitting on the floor. They saw how their sausage was made. America threw up. President Roosevelt demanded an investigation. The Pure Food and Drug Act was passed. It seemed this would kill the business. But the opposite happened. New sanitary standards required expensive concrete floors and stainless steel. Small slaughterhouses couldn't afford this. and went bust. But the giants, Armour and Swift, had money. They modernized their plants, and the government essentially destroyed their competitors. The Big Five became untouchable. Part 3. Greatness, Tourists, and Wars. In the first half of the 20th century, the slaughterhouses were Chicago's main tourist attraction. It sounds wild, but 500,000 tourists a year came here to watch cattle being slaughtered. Galleries were built for them above the killing floors. Ladies in hats and gentlemen in suits looked at rivers of blood as a triumph of progress. It was a man conquers nature show. Around the slaughterhouses grew the back of the yards neighborhood. It was a melting pot of nations: Irish, Poles, Lithuanians, Mexicans, African Americans. The work was hellish. The smell was so strong pilots could smell it from planes. But people had jobs. It was here that powerful unions were born, which in the 30s won decent wages for workers. World War II was the peak. The U.S. Army marched on canned food from Chicago. The famous Spam, tinned meat, rations. It was all made here, 24 hours a day. The lights of the slaughterhouses never went out. Chicago fed half the planet, and it seemed this centralized power was eternal. Part 4. Signals of change, asphalt and boxes. Chicago's killer came not with a knife, but with a paver. In 1956, construction of the interstate highway system began. Suddenly, the railroad ceased to be king. Powerful refrigerated trucks appeared. Now you didn't need to haul a live cow to downtown Chicago. You could build a factory right in a field in Kansas or Iowa next to the farm. New competitors appeared like IBP, Iowa beef packers. They built single-story high-tech hangars in the fields. Chicago's 19th century slaughterhouses were multi-story. Cattle had to be driven up ramps. It was slow and expensive. New single-story plants were faster and more efficient. The final blow was the boxed beef innovation. New plants butchered carcasses on site, vacuum-packed the cuts into boxes, and shipped them directly to stores. Supermarkets no longer needed professional butchers to chop carcasses. They just needed stockers. Chicago, as the great middleman, became a redundant link in the chain. Part 5. The fall, ecology, and flight. Besides economics, there was ecology. Bubbly Creek got its name for a reason. It bubbled from the gases of decomposing blood and fat at the bottom. In the 60s, new environmental laws required the construction of expensive treatment facilities. The old Armour and Swift plants were too decrepit to modernize. The companies counted the money and made a cold decision: leave. They closed their Chicago slaughterhouses and moved production west, closer to the cows and further from the unions. They abandoned the city that created them. The back of the yards neighborhood began to die. Part 6. The crash, gate to nowhere. The end came quietly. On July 30th, 1971, at midnight, the Union stockyards closed forever. No fanfare. They just put a lock on the gate. Bulldozers demolished the wooden pens and brick buildings. The huge territory was cleared to zero. The only thing left standing was the famous stone gate from 1879 with a steer head on top. Now it leads nowhere. Behind it lies a boring industrial park, soda warehouses and logistics centers. The blood was washed away. The smell, which was the city's calling card, dissipated. For South Chicago, it was a catastrophe. The loss of 40,000 jobs led to poverty and crime, from which the area hasn't recovered to this day. The city lost its identity, ceasing to be the hog butcher for the world. Part 7. Conclusion of the story. The story of the Chicago stockyards is a lesson that geography is not eternal. The railroad created this empire, and the truck killed it. Technology always defeats tradition. Multi-story factories in the city center lost to flat hangars in the fields. Armour and Swift were innovators, but their heirs held onto walls instead of holding on to efficiency. Today, when you buy a vacuum-packed steak, you are using Chicago's legacy. but the city itself remains merely a museum of this industry. The stone gate stands as a reminder. What seems like the center of the universe today can become just a monument in a warehouse parking lot tomorrow.